Right. Yeah, if you...
Just checking that the live stream is working and that Sonia can hear me. All right, good evening, members. Welcome to the Development Committee, 25th of June 2020, and a welcome to anyone that is watching the live stream. Our agenda item 1 are apologies for absence. They've been received from Councillor Stanley. And number 2, substitute members. We've had notice that Councillor Newport is substituting from Councillor Stanley. Councillor Hookway is not here. Councillor Mrs Mason, would you like to declare, please?
Yes, Councillor Mr Hookway was going to attempt to come in, so I don't know what the difficulty is, but I will substitute for him in his absence.
Okay,
and
thank you.
Apologies for him. Thank you.
Thank you very much for confirming that. Item 4 is minutes of the meeting held on the 7th of May 2020. Are you happy in due course for me to sign those as a correct and accurate record of that meeting?
Agreed.
Thank you. Yeah. Okay.
Agreed.
Plenty of indication there. Thank you. To receive declarations of interest. Okay, just giving a moment as I look through. There are none. Thank you very much. So that takes us straight on to item 6, which is the only item that we have with us tonight, which is a referred item from the weekly list, land adjacent to 16 Morins Close, Great Wakering. Just to remind members that there is the report and then there is the addendum. Are there any members that have not seen the addendum? That's great then. So it's over to Mr. Stranks, who's going to do the presentation on this one. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Morins Close, that you'll see marked here with the little sign, is part of a residential area that's surrounded by farmland on the eastern side of Great Wakering.
Can I just stop you there? The sharing hasn't happened just yet.
Ah, right. How do I share? Do I share? How do I share? How do I share?
Everybody hear the motorbikes in Great Wakering?
Is that sharing, Chairman?
I think so. Yes.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah.
I'll start again.
Okay,
Morins Close is a small cul-de-sac, a residential area that's surrounded by farmland on the eastern side of Great Wakering over here, some 870 metres or so from the North Sea coastline across further to the east with intervening farmland and Ministry of Defence land. Members saw this site on the 13th of June. The application is to a site at the western end of Morins Close. If we zip back here to the location plan, and we will see here's the pattern of development, Chairman. New road along the top to the north. Morins Close comes in here with frontage development, and there's a courtyard approach to this area with a parking area fronting all the buildings. The site is clearly identified here edge red. This is an end of terraced unit with a largest side garden. The application before us tonight is to subdivide that plot, as you can see here, with the existing dwelling shown and the curtilage shown thus, the cursor. The building you see shown hatched is the proposed building, which is detached from the terraced block with a metre sideway shared to give access to both the retained existing garden and the new garden proposed to serve the dwelling. There would be a triangular paved front garden area that follows the fence line we saw on the site. If we jump to the next plan, the proposal you'll see is carrying the design principles of the existing building, with the brick lower portions rendered upper walling and tiled roofing. Members will have seen, if I can try and zoom on this, that the layout at the ground floor incorporates a carport feature, and the remainder of the ground floor is given over to a kitchen and living area with stairs serving and upstairs. The notation of the building is that it has one large bedroom across the back and a lounge office or gymnasium for the remainder of the part, with a bathroom upstairs. If we look at the context, as we saw, this is the northern wall of the building with the angled garden area with the future paved area proposed here behind this fence line, showing the overall design form and appearance of the buildings. This is viewed from the opposite side. On some of the mapping that we have, Chairman, there is indication of posts indicating this is a through route, but we can see that it is a brick wall that has been provided there. I don't know for how long, but clearly vehicles can't pass through this area. And if members see that there's a number of reasons that officers found that attract a reason for refusal on this application. That plan isn't opening, Chairman, but if you bear with me. Members will have seen from the recommendation that the site is in flood zone 3, and I'm rather hoping that this plan will show the flood zone mapping. If I come out and perhaps try to go back in again, that may help. Let's see what happens. Here we go. And if I can get that to rotate, this site, this is the plan needs to rotate through 90 degrees, but if you can see my screen, you see I can't find the, there, I may be able to get a chance. There we go. The site is indicated, Morris Close coming in here. We saw on the site visit that the geography of the layout of the area is that the application site is just inside this dark shading overlain by the white hatching, which is flood zone 3A. Flood zone 3, which is the area the Environment Agency identifies as being most susceptible to flooding, is divided actually into two parts. Flood zone 3A with the white chevrons indicates that there are better defences to this part of flood zone 3 than the balance of the remainder of the zone. But the Environment Agency classifies all land in England as being in one of three primary flood zones. Flood zone 1 is the area least susceptible for flooding and where the Environment Agency directs development should go. Flood zone 2 is partly susceptible to flooding, and flood zones 3 are the most susceptible to flooding. And we saw on the site that the curtilage of the site that's the subject of the application falls firmly within that flood zone, so that the applicant has to first of all pass a sequential test as to whether this is the only site available for development, put very simply, and then an exception test that if it can be exceptionally approved. And you'll have seen from the officer report that the site is one of a number of what we would call windfall type sites, where gardens are subdivided or small sites are redeveloped, which happen across the district. And there isn't a specified need or shortfall in the Wakering area that demands that the site contributes to a shortfall, a significant shortfall in the area, thus passing the sequential and then exception testing. So the application is recommended for refusal, firstly because of flood risk grounds. There is also, members will see, a second refusal, partly relating to the inadequacy of the current flood risk assessment as identified by the Environment Agency on levels. The applicant could overcome that by raising the design of the proposal slightly. But given that it can't pass in officer's view the first step, then this forms a second reason for refusal. Now, members will have seen from the side elevation, hopefully we have some photographs here, the proposal, the existing dwelling has a range of side windows on which it is quite reliant for the upstairs, and also the kitchen and door to the side of the house. We saw on the earlier photographs that there's not too much windows on the front, although the front door is recessed to the side, viewing eastwards. And then hopefully we could see, no we won't, that the dominance of these windows on giving amenity to the house would be shaded by the dwelling proposed. Now, the applicant has amended the application to feature roof lights to this existing dwelling to try and improve the light access, and has provided information to do with daylighting and shading, but officers do not feel that overcomes the principal objection that the presence of the building, which is more or less a copy of the structure of what we see here, a metre from these windows, would not cease to cause a poor internal living environment for the future occupiers of the life of this dwelling. The last reasons, Chairman, concern car parking. At the site that we're concerned about is up here, and you'll see from, if you can, from this layout, that the applicant proposes one car parking space in the shell of the building at ground floor, but is reliant on a second car parking space on the outside. Although the application is described as one bedroom, and we've seen from the layouts that that is the case, the floor space is such that the bedroom could be subdivided. You need a 7.5 square metre minimum to the standards for a single bedroom. The two bedrooms are 17 and 15 square metres, the rooms upstairs each. So it is possible in officers' views that a second bedroom could be created, and we're alert to that. And the extra car parking space that the applicant says is possible is essentially outside of the ownership of the site. So the applicant could not control that. And you'll see on the addendum, Chairman, that one of the residents has explained that when all people are home, as it were, this area does get congested with parked vehicles, and questions that whether, if another dwelling was added there, that access would be successful. The last reason for on the agenda, Chairman, is that the dwelling is within an area that influences or the recreational demands from future occupiers could impact upon the European designated coastal sites. Now, that were the application to be approved, that would require a payment of £125.58 in mitigation. But because the application is principally being recommended refusal, that payment has not been sought. So the recommendation, Chairman, is refusal for the reasons set out in the report.
Thank you. Members, we have a statement from Mr. Brett Telford, the applicant, that Sonia is going to read out to us. Thank you.
This application was made as a single one-bed dwelling proposal. Reference in the report to 2-bed is incorrect. Other approved schemes have single dwellings with additional living spaces. The Red Lion Great Wakering one-bed unit scheme didn't assume the study could be used as a bedroom and would not comply with parking standards under this assumption. When our design changed within curtilage parking, the footprint and massing remained the same to maintain street scene appearance. With the loss of ground floor area for parking, the first floor was used as living space. Our one-bed proposal is compliant with policy. Highways have accepted it's a one-bed dwelling, and this reason for refusal should be removed. There is a legal right of way to the new dwelling's parking area, so full access from the shared surface areas is maintained. The daylight, sunlight and overshadowing report for the latest application has been missed. Essex policies rely on BRE standards in determining daylight and sunlight. Few new schemes fully comply with BRE standards, e.g. Glebe Close, infill single dwelling, Red Lion, Star Lane. Our application also included plans and elevations for alterations to the kitchen with an additional window and one roof light to each of the west elevation bedrooms. This improved the position above the existing levels of light and removed impact from overshadowing. The dwelling location is at the same level as the neighbouring Glebe property in flood zones 2 and 1 within 5 metres. The flood map for planning is at 1 in 2,500 scale. It is more accurate to review the technical solutions when the level of discrepancy at this scale is in metres. Current flooding position for this proposal. This location has never flooded, even in 1953. There is no current risk based on model data. 2 site checks show low risk from all sources of flooding. The EA had a holding objection to the last 2 applications that flood risk in 100 years with climate change would be 170 millimetres above ground level based on new modelled data. The current finished floor is 150 millimetres above ground level as per typical DPC construction details, i.e. a 20 millimetre difference from EA level. We can raise levels by 20 millimetres easily and be above the 100-year climate change risk. This could be conditioned in any approval and would remove the EA holding objection. We're in close proximity to a Zone 1 area, so at no risk with evacuation. There would always be first floor refuge. Design resilience is added by first floor ring mains, improved site drainage through both natural permeable landscaping, rainwater harvesting, suspended floors and adjusted garden falls for water storage in flood event. Approved flood zone 3 schemes similar to this include Zone 3, 336 Little Wakering Road, subdivision of housing classification use C3, same as Morins Close. EA removed objections based on a first floor refuge. Zone 3, 9 Kingsman's Farm Road, surface and tidal flooding risk, undefended and intensified land due to size and drainage. Sequential tests showed land for housing not identified and no other developable sites. Also designated Green Belt and Coastal Protection Belt. Objection by EA. The AECOM South Essex SFRA for Rochford noted in Zones 3, even change of use should not be permitted unless proven to be safe for its lifetime. Change of use approved schemes, St Mary Virgin Church, change from church to dwelling, high risk of flooding and only protection measure is first floor refuge, no sequential or exception test passed and scheme not compliant with being safe for its lifetime. Waterside Farm, Zone 3 approval, EA advice was unsafe in future and should pass sequential and exception test as actual risk of floods was 3.81 metres, not safe for its lifetime, approved as change of use. 286 Wakering Road, approved as demolition and build of new dwelling. Brandy Hole Yacht Club, highly vulnerable, levels elevated above flood level, sequential tests and exception tests not applied as change of use. Shangri-La Holiday Park Helbridge, in flood zone 1 by about 10 metres. Currently, the climate change impact will mean this development is not safe for its lifetime. For the sequential test to fail, you need to have similar deliverable sites in lower risk areas, zones 2 or 1. Our planning statement and flood risk assessment address the need for housing in the district based on local policy and government reports. Planning confirmed that self-build plots have not been delivered and had no information on similar available sites. The allocations plan includes flood zone allocations, suggesting a principle to accept them if safe. Point 19 of the officer's report notes reliability on an appeal case. This appeal has two key considerations of why it should not be applied. Technically different. Flood risk levels are higher on the appeal site. With climate change, they reach 3 metres, thus higher risk on levels and safe egress. The EA did not object. On principle, it would be safe for its lifetime with first floor refuge. This appeal decides on land availability from 5 years ago and is now outdated for housing supply, as noted in the points on the government buffer demands. Availability of sites has not been demonstrated, and our flood assessment covers compliance with the sequential test criteria under the NPPF. This is flexible living and working dwelling above national space standards with a technical solution on low value land in an existing sustainable community. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Efty, you're the member that referred this one. Do you wish to speak on it initially?
I can do initially. The resident of 16 Moorings Close asked me to refer this one in for the reasons which he's eloquently put over in his statement about the parking, the overshadowing, the flooding report, and the consideration of overbearing. I put it in for him. I think he's done quite a good report. It's quite a good answer there, and I'd like to hear the officers. I know the officers have answered some questions, but not in detail where he's put his actual his statement in. If that'd be quite useful, please.
Thank you. Councillor Mrs. Mason.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I note what the applicant has stated, and he's obviously done some considerable research, but any failure of the past should not be a reason to repeat that failure now or in the future. Whilst the applicant may intend to use the second upstairs room other than as a bedroom, indeed, many households, myself included, repurpose a bedroom for other uses. There is nothing to prevent an occupier using this room as a bedroom, and indeed the layout would indicate that this would be the more common use for such a space. Therefore, the officer consideration of dealing with this as a 2-bedroom property is, in my view, both understandable and acceptable. Having attended the site visit, I consider this application to be unacceptable for the following reasons. The relationship and impact on the neighbouring property by having an overbearing impact and by overshadowing the primary site windows of number 16 would render both the properties, certainly number 16, too dark, I would say, and would be unsuitable. The report mentions the garden size spaces that says they're undersized. I know that the officers consider this acceptable, but we have a policy with a minimum garden size space. And if the garden space is undersized, that's another reason to refuse this application. With regards to the car parking, I understand that access is dependent upon land not in the control of the applicant, nor the highway. Therefore, there is a great risk that the access would not be available all the time, and therefore would exacerbate any parking problems. And we have heard in the report that there are parking problems in the area. And the carport itself, I don't believe is in keeping with the neighbouring properties. The sequential test and the exception test, I understand from reading the officer's report, have not been met. But most concerning is the fact that this proposal lies within flood zone risk 3, or flood risk zone 3. I'm never sure which way around that is. And the objection from the Environmental Agency on those lines Indeed, with ever increasing flood risks generally, and most of us have seen flooding generally in the area, and ever increasing flood risks due to environmental changes, not only should this applicant fail, but it is doubtful in my mind that permission would be given today for the host property, number 16. I trust that members will give appropriate weight to the risks involved and the comprehensive report conducted by our officers, and I believe this application should be refused. And I will move for refusal. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Can I just confirm that you're moving for refusal on the basis of the 5 recommendations printed 6.1.12?
Hold on,
They're the ones in the report.
I've got to get that back. You'll have to bear with me.
Okay, I'll come back for that clarification later.
Yeah. Okay.
Councillor Reeves, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Most of the points I was going to bring up have been covered by Councillor Christine Mason, but there is one thing that I would like to put out, that in the response that the applicant has put forward, he actually mentioned there, when it comes to parking, that the additional parking that he's talking about, he has a legal right of access to. Legal right of access doesn't give him legal right of parking. And the legal right of access would mean that it would be something that should be available to other residents around there. So to actually call that something that is linked very heavily to this development proposal, I think is quite wrong. The other thing is that when we went to site and saw the conditions that were there, to use the parking space that he's actually proposing as the second parking space, it would be blocking access to the garden gate to number 17 opposite. And so for that reason, the inadequacy of the parking, that's the reason being why I would actually go with refusal of this application. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Wilson, you indicated.
Thank you, Chairman. The report or the statement from the applicant mentioned a couple of places in Holbridge, and the reason why I bring these up is because these sites had planning permission long before the Environment Agency allocated or categorised land as 1, 2 and 3. So actually, to look at the Shangri-La site, which has been brought back into action, this had planning permission for the 1970s and was used from the 1980s. So I think that with the national, the NPPF, we shouldn't really be looking to build anything in flood zone 3, and we shouldn't use these as precedents. Thank you, Chairman.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Newport.
Thank you, Chairman. I note on page 6.19, 44, that Essex County Council highways were consulted, but there was no comments received, which I do find rather disappointing, as it seems to be a common trait. And I wondered how many times the officers had actually contacted highways for a response. But generally, I think one of the other points that I would raise is that the statement from the applicant contained a lot of technical detail, and I think would have benefited from drawings, etc., with that statement, as I did find it hard to follow in places. But I think the reasons for refusal are compelling, and I think the officers have highlighted them, you know, and the points that they've raised for refusal, I would totally support, and I would second Councillor Christine Mason's proposal to refuse.
Thank you. Just for the sake of clarity, as we've got a seconder now, Councillor Mrs. Mason, would you just confirm that you're moving the reasons for refusal based on those printed from 6.1.2, the 5 reasons?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I am, but I'm also including the undersized garden space as opposed to policy SPD2, I think it is. Mr. Stranks, I'm sure, will correct me if I'm wrong. And the other area that I think it should be refused on, which I can't see it in those refusals, but it's probably that's car parking refusal. It is in there, but the concern that is that the land is not under the control of the applicant and therefore can't be relied on to facilitate the building.
Yeah, we'll get clarification on that element in a bit. Can
Yeah.
I confirm then, Councillor Newport, that that was what you were seconding?
Yep, I will
Thank
second.
you. Councillor Williams, please. So we're now moving toward the motion for refusal. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. The point's been made. I was about to offer a second for Councillor Mrs Mason. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Can I ask Mr Stranks to come back and particularly to comment on the 2 additional items that Councillor Mason is suggesting as reasons for refusal, please?
Thank you, Chairman. Firstly, dealing with the car parking area, the reason you'll see on the agenda speaks to the lack of a space. As it's been said in the debate, the applicant would have right to access that area despite or notwithstanding congestion issues, but you can demonstrate with that reason as recommended the shortfall. It's clear the size of the building, the potential for subdivision. There are previous applications that proposed a greater number of bedrooms in the same box or shell, if you like, of the building. So officers are confident that that is demonstrable. We have to be careful if we perhaps speculate with some reasons that aren't subjective. So, you know, design, for instance, is a subjective matter, but where you have perhaps mathematical standards, like, for instance, a dwelling of a certain size should have a certain number of car parking spaces, officers are confident in that reason. With regard to the garden areas, you'll see that officers in this occasion have not recommended refusal. There is a children's play space area nearby to the site. It was just through that area that was bricked off that we saw on site. And one of the things we find when defending these appeals on this issue is that the inspectors ask whether the space was usable. And where we stood in the site visit, you'll recall that there was a squarish rectangular space that future occupiers could make use of. It's not like we sometimes see with some flatted schemes where the developer has to squeeze in a lot of car parking spaces. So they say put 10 square metres over in one corner and 20 in another part. And the totality of the space provided is broken into small little compartments. Because the space offered on this layout is a usable space, and given the availability of some relief to that space with the play area, officers didn't feel it would be a reasonable position to take to refuse permission for the garden area failing. There was a point raised earlier, Chairman, if you wanted me to come back to that, about the applicant's statement, particularly the history of some of the sites. I can go through that.
I think the applicant's statement is the applicant's statement. It doesn't form a formal part of the report, so it is what it is. So I don't think we'll go into that in detail. I'll come back to Councillor Mrs Mason. You've heard what the officers have said with regard to garden space. They wouldn't essentially be comfortable in supporting that given the proximity of the playground, and I think that proximity is something that we were all able to see on the site visit, although obviously at that moment it was closed for obvious reasons. And the feeling that the issue around the car parking is sufficiently covered. So can I ask you to take your position on that? And if necessary, we'll vote on the addition or not of those particular additional reasons. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm very happy to defer to the officer's expertise in relation to the car parking issue. Having been on the site visit, I was just rather concerned that it wasn't perhaps covered in the way that it might have been, but I'm sure the officer's expertise far exceeds mine, and I'm happy to defer to that. I must admit, I am slightly concerned about the issue of the garden space, because I understand the officer's point of view, but we have policies, and I don't see much point in us having policies if we're going to always put exceptions to. Perhaps a way around this would be, and again, I will defer to Mr. Stranks on this with his expertise, if we just note that it doesn't meet the standard garden space.
Thank you.
I mean, we have turned down similar other properties for less than that when there has been, on other applications, when there has been play areas nearby. So it just strikes me slightly inconsistent. But I would prefer to defer to the officer, because I'm not an expert on that.
Okay, thank you. So I think we can confidently leave it to officers to note by whatever mechanism they have that the garden is undersized, but their professional opinion that the proximity of the public play space is a mitigating factor on this occasion, so that should anyone try to quote this as an example for an undersized garden, then the fact that there is a formal playground within what 10 meters of the site is the mitigating factor wholly on that one. So with that in mind, members, and just before we go to the vote, as we are doing this virtually, can I confirm that you've all heard the evidence, that you're in an informed position now to make a judgment and vote on this item? Can I just have a physical show of hands that everyone is content to move on to the vote? No one's got any issues. Thank you very much. The voting we will do as a roll call, and with this one, I will call out your name. The format that we've evolved is, please say if you would like there to be a recorded vote, and then your vote for, against, or abstain. Did you indicate something, Councillor Newport?
No, Chairman, sorry.
Okay, thank you. Right, here we go then. Councillor FD.
No recorded vote and abstain.
Councillor Eaves.
No recorded vote and against.
Councillor Mrs Mason.
No recorded vote. Against.
Councillor Iano.
No recorded vote. Against.
Councillor Merrick.
Mr. Chairman, can I just come in there? We're saying against, we're actually voting for refusal.
But
I think there's been a bit of confusion there.
yeah, for clarity, members, it's a fair point that Councillor Mrs Mason makes. We know what we're saying, but for clarity, then I will go through this. So you are voting for the reasons for refusal as printed, or against the reasons for the approval. So if you were happy with the approval, you would be voting for. If you wanted this development to proceed, you would vote against. And obviously,
Can I change my vote there, please, Chairman?
So I will start from the top again, so that we've got absolute clarity. So Councillor FD.
No recorded vote and abstain.
Thank you. Councillor Eves.
No recorded vote and 4.
Thank you. Councillor Mrs Mason.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, sorry for the confusion. No recorded vote and 4 refusal.
Councillor Iano.
No recorded vote and 4.
Councillor Merrick.
No recorded vote and 4 refusal as stated.
Councillor Newport.
No recorded vote and 4 refusal.
Councillor Mrs Shaw.
No recorded vote and 4 for refusal.
Councillor Mr Shaw.
No recorded vote, 4 refusal.
Myself, Councillor Smith. No recorded vote and 4 refusal. Councillor Weston.
No recorded vote and 4 refusals, Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor Williams.
Thank you, Chairman. No recorded vote and 4 the refusal.
Thank you. Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Chairman. No recorded vote and 4 refusal.
Thank you. Councillor Wotton.
No recorded vote and 4 refusal.
Thank you. Just give us one moment. I have 12 for the refusal and 1 abstention. That is a really clear refusal of that item. That is just the one item that we have tonight. So I believe that at 8:13, I can thank you very much for your attendance and close the meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.